I'm Riley Mitchell. I'm 28. And to my family, I've always been the disappointment in government issued boots. When the call from the Pentagon came, inviting me to a White House ceremony, I almost dropped my phone. My hands, trained to stay steady while packing wounds under fire, trembled for the first time in years. For as long as I can remember, my parents treated my military career like a phase I'd eventually outgrow. They laughed at my uniform, rolled their eyes at my medals, and introduced me at dinner parties as our daughter, doing something with the Army. What they didn't know? That classified mission, the one none of us were supposed to talk about, had just changed everything. And before the most powerful man in the world pinned a Distinguished Service Cross on my chest, my family was about to hear the truth, for the very first time. Because this might just change how you see the people behind the uniform. If this kind of story resonates with you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep telling the stories that matter. Let's begin. I stood on the front porch of my parents' house in Boston, staring at the familiar colonial facade that had once felt like home. The flagstone walkway was pristine, the hedges perfectly trimmed. Not a single leaf out of place, as if the entire exterior had been manicured just for appearances, much like everything else in the Mitchell household. I adjusted my Army service uniform, tugging at the cuffs with hands that had once packed chest seals and emergency gauze under enemy fire. Tonight, those hands just trembled with something more subtle. Anticipation, dread, both. Through the frosted glass of the front door, I could already hear laughter and clinking glasses. Ethan's laughter, and my mother's voice in that sing-song tone she used whenever there was something to show off. I rang the bell anyway. When the door swung open, my father stood there with that look. The one that said, "You're unexpected and probably an inconvenience." "You're early," he said, stepping aside without offering a hug. "Dinner doesn't start for another 30 minutes. I stepped inside, the familiar scent of lemon polish and old books filling my lungs like a weighted blanket. From the dining room, I caught glimpses of Charlotte showing off her engagement ring to a small cluster of relatives. The air buzzed with congratulatory comments, questions about wedding venues, honeymoon destinations. No one noticed me yet. Not until my mother turned and her gaze landed on the uniform. Her smile faltered for half a second before she recovered. "Oh, Riley, you made it," she said, her tone more obligatory than warm. Her eyes flicked down to the medals on my chest, as if calculating whether they were real or just decorative. "Traffic was light," I said simply, setting my overnight bag by the staircase. Ethan noticed me next. His eyes sparkled with something between amusement and pity. "Look who's back from playing soldier," he quipped, raising his wine glass in a mock toast. I let the comment slide, walking toward the dining room. The long oak table had been set with meticulous care. Silver polished, napkins folded into origami swans, place cards written in my mother's delicate cursive. Mine sat at the far end, 3 seats away from the rest of the family cluster. Some things never changed. As the appetizers were served, conversation revolved entirely around Ethan and Charlotte, their engagement photos, their new condo near Beacon Hill, Charlotte's promotion at her law firm. Not a single question about my last deployment. Not one inquiry about where I'd been, what I'd done. I cleared my throat, hoping to shift the topic. "We just wrapped a joint training exercise at Fort Drum," I said casually, placing my water glass down. "Medical triage under simulated combat conditions. My unit performed well." My mother didn't even look up from her salad plate. "That's nice, dear," she said, her voice breezy. "But really, when will you settle down and get a real job?" My fork paused midair. A real job. The words hung there, souring the air more effectively than any spoiled wine. I forced a smile, stabbing at a cherry tomato with perhaps more force than necessary. "I like what I do." Ethan chuckled softly, swirling his Pinot Noir. "Still playing soldier, huh?" The back of my neck flushed hot, but I stayed silent. My fingers tightened around the fork handle until my knuckles turned white. Years of training taught me to breathe through the anger, to stay mission-focused. This wasn't a firefight, just another dinner with my family. When dessert arrived, lemon tart, Ethan's favorite, my mother, without malice or awareness, delivered the final blow. "Maybe one day," she said, sipping her coffee, "you'll do something we're actually proud of." I didn't answer. Couldn't. Instead, I picked up my phone, needing distraction, needing distance. One new notification. HQ alert. Immediate deployment order. Report to base. Monday 0600. Subject: Operation Lion's Shield status. Confirmed. I stared at the screen, my pulse steadying for the first time that night. Prepare for deployment. ChatGPT Junnoy. Out there, nobody cared about my SAT scores. They just wanted to stay alive. The rotors of the Black Hawk chopped violently through the thin Afghan air, each pulse of sound vibrating in my chest. Dust and grit swirled through the open cabin door, sticking to my skin, my gear, my throat. I sat cross-legged near the rear, double-checking my medical bag like it was sacred scripture. Trauma shears, secured. Quick clot, ready. IV fluids, triple counted. Captain Davis stood at the front, conferring with the pilots. His voice was low, clipped, calm, like always. I remembered the first time I met him back during Combat Medic Advanced Skills training. After my first field trauma assessment under stress drills, he'd pulled me aside, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "You've got the hands and the head for this, Mitchell." That sentence stuck with me like armor. We were minutes out from Tangi Valley. The mission brief had been simple, at least on paper. Routine reconnaissance with potential intel pickup. Ground intel suggested minimal enemy presence, but Afghanistan had a nasty habit of making liars out of intel reports. The sudden burst of enemy fire didn't come as a warning shot. It came as an ambush. Alarms shrieked through the cabin. The helicopter lurched violently left, then down. Screams mixed with metal grinding and the gut-twisting roar of an engine choking mid-flight. I barely had time to grab the nearest strap before gravity turned traitor. We slammed into the valley floor with bone-crushing force. My helmet cracked hard against the interior wall, sending white-hot sparks across my vision. When the world stopped spinning, I tasted copper. Smoke poured in through the ventilation system. Over the screaming engines, I heard something worse. My teammates groaning, some not moving at all. Training kicked in. Survival mode. I crawled toward the cockpit first. Major Reynolds, our pilot, lay slumped over the controls, blood streaming from a gash across her forehead. I snapped a cervical collar onto her neck with shaking hands, wiping sweat and dirt from her face. "Major, stay with me. You hear me? Stay awake." The co-pilot, Lieutenant Wilson, was conscious but pale, his left arm grotesquely twisted at an angle it wasn't built for. "Compound fracture, humerus," I muttered to myself, grabbing a splint from my bag. "You're gonna hate me for this, sir." I braced, pulled, aligned, splinted. Wilson screamed, but he didn't pass out. Small mercies. "Mitchell, outside, now!" Captain Davis's voice cut through the chaos. I grabbed what supplies I could and scrambled from the wreckage. The firefight had already begun. From our 12 o'clock, muzzle flashes lit up the ridgeline. Bullets cracked through the air, snapping against rock and dirt with terrifying randomness. I slid behind a boulder, checking Reynolds' vitals as Davis and the others returned fire. The reality hit fast. We were pinned down with 2 non-ambulatory wounded and a numerically superior enemy force closing in. Then came the pain. A sudden sharp burn seared through my left thigh. I looked down to see blood blossoming through my pant leg. Shrapnel. But I didn't have time for pain. "Torres," I yelled, motioning her over. "Pressure dressing here, here, and here." I pointed to 3 soldiers with bleeding wounds. I ripped open a tourniquet for Specialist Rivera, who had taken a round through the upper thigh. The dirt under him turned dark with blood. Bullets chewed the ground inches from my elbow as I worked. I didn't flinch. "Airstrike, coordinates now," Davis roared, tossing me a GPS unit. I crawled. dragging my injured leg like dead weight until I had a line of sight past the ridge. Holding the unit steady with both hands, I relayed the target coordinates over the comms while dirt kicked up around me with each enemy round. Coordinates locked, I panted. Call it in. Now. Minutes later, the valley erupted in flames and thunder. Half the enemy positions went silent, but not all of them. As the hours dragged, ammo ran low. The wounded multiplied. I moved like a machine, packing wounds, checking airways, pushing fluids through the last IV bag we had. By sunset, I'd used my belt as a makeshift tourniquet, sacrificed my last morphine injector to Bennett, and was fighting dizziness from blood loss. Captain Davis crouched beside me. "Mitchell, you're taking point," he said. "We need to move east to that ridge line. Air support can't land here." I didn't argue. Couldn't. I grabbed Rivera under the arms and dragged him, my injured leg screaming in protest. Torres and 2 others carried Reynolds and Wilson. The air was thick with smoke and fear, but no one broke rank. We moved through the night, weaving between rocks and trees, always one breath away from discovery. I counted every step, every pulse of pain, every labored breath from the wounded behind me, down to one IV bag. I rationed it drop by drop, moving the line between the most critical as needed. By dawn, the rescue chopper appeared like salvation from the sky. As the rotor wash kicked dust into our eyes, I helped lift Reynolds onto a stretcher. My hands, steady until that moment, finally trembled. I took one step toward the ramp. My vision narrowed. The world tilted, and I collapsed at the foot of the boarding gate. They strapped me onto a stretcher alongside the others. Someone placed an oxygen mask over my face, but I barely noticed. Blood soaked through my uniform, cold and sticky against my skin. As they carried me into the helicopter, my phone buzzed in the side pouch of my vest. One new message. "Heard what you did. Damn proud of you, Mitchell." Torres. I came home with scars, and they still only saw failure. The taxi pulled up to the curb outside my parents' house just as the sun began to set over the Boston skyline. From the outside, everything looked the same. The trimmed hedges, the polished brass house numbers, the same hydrangeas blooming under the bay window. Same walls, same cold faces waiting inside. I adjusted the lapel of my Army service uniform, making sure the Purple Heart sat square on my chest. Visible, unmistakable. The deep maroon ribbon stood out starkly against the green fabric. It felt heavier than any metal I'd ever worn, not because of the weight, but because of what it represented. I stepped out, paid the driver, and grabbed my overnight bag. With every step toward the front door, I rehearsed what I might say if someone asked about the medal. Enemy fire, 3 men saved, almost bled out on a dirt road halfway across the world, but I knew better than to expect the question. Inside, the house buzzed with noise. Laughter, clinking glasses, upbeat jazz floating from the speakers in the living room. The engagement party was in full swing. Charlotte's friends mingled near the wine bar. Ethan stood by the fireplace, surrounded by family friends, holding court like he always did. No one noticed me at first. I lingered in the foyer, taking in the scene. Photos of Ethan lined the hallway. College graduation, first day at the law firm, vacation shots from Italy with Charlotte. Not one photo of me in uniform. Not basic training. Not AIT. Not deployment. Not even the framed picture I'd mailed them from Afghanistan after my promotion. My mother finally spotted me from across the room. Her smile tightened for a half-second before she waved absently, as if I were an unexpected +1 at someone else's wedding. "Oh, Riley, you're here." "I told you I'd be," I said, keeping my voice level. "You look formal," she said, eyeing the uniform like it was an ill-fitting costume. "I came straight from base," I lied. Truth was, I'd gone back to my apartment first, spent 20 minutes making sure every ribbon was perfectly aligned, making sure the Purple Heart sat where no one could miss it. I walked toward the living room, weaving through conversations about wedding venues and catering options. People glanced at me, then quickly looked away. The uniform made them uncomfortable. Or maybe it was just me. Ethan caught sight of me next. He raised his glass like he was toasting me, but his words said otherwise. Well, if it isn't our family's world traveler. He joked loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Back from, what is it this time? Another training seminar? Something like that, I said, forcing a smile. I joined the gathering near the hors d'oeuvre table, but every time I tried to engage in conversation, the subject shifted away. When I mentioned Afghanistan, my father immediately cut in with a question about Charlotte's upcoming bar exam. When I referenced Walter Reed, my mother launched into a story about Ethan's latest courtroom victory. At one point, a neighbor noticed the medal on my chest. "Is that?" she began. Before I could answer, my mother laughed lightly. "Oh, that? Training injury. You know how the military gives out medals for paper cuts these days?" My throat tightened. My stomach turned. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. I turned away, trying to breathe through it, but Charlotte, sweet, oblivious Charlotte, chose that exact moment to walk over. She tilted her head, genuinely curious, her smile warm but tentative. "What's the Purple Heart for?" she asked. I froze for half a beat, then answered evenly. "Enemy fire. I saved 3 men that day." Her eyes widened, but before she could ask more, my brother chuckled from across the room. "Dramatic as always, Riley." That was it. That was the crack in the dam. I turned, leveling my gaze at the entire room. My voice came low, controlled, but shaking with something deeper than anger. "I almost died saving people you'll never know," I said, my words slicing through the room's noise like a scalpel. "And still, none of you care." A stunned silence fell over the crowd. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Conversations halted mid-sentence. My mother opened her mouth to respond, but I was already turning away. I pulled my phone from my pocket, needing, craving, an escape. One new notification blinked on the screen. Department of Defense, report to Pentagon. Immediate, confidential orders. I walked into the Pentagon expecting paperwork, not a life-changing summons. The corridors smelled like polished floors and government-grade air conditioning. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead as I made my way toward the office of the Secretary of the Army. My dress uniform freshly pressed, but still feeling like unfamiliar armor on my skin. I'd been summoned without context. Just a terse message. Report at 0900, full dress. Mandatory. I'd barely slept the night before, mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. Disciplinary action? A review board? Some obscure investigation into the mission we still weren't allowed to talk about? My palms were damp as I knocked. Enter. General Harris stood behind a massive oak desk, papers stacked with military precision. Next to him, a civilian in a dark suit and narrow tie gave me a nod. Mr. Collins, from the White House Military Office. "Sergeant Mitchell," General Harris began, gesturing for me to sit. "We'll get straight to it." I sat, spine straight, heart hammering. "The Department of the Army has reviewed the reports from Operation Lion's Shield. Your conduct, your medical interventions, your leadership under fire," he said. I opened my mouth to respond, but he raised a hand. "Save the humility," he said, sliding a folder across the desk. "You're being awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. From the President, in person, at the White House." For a second, I couldn't breathe. The words blurred on the official letterhead in front of me. My brain caught on a single phrase. "For extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations against an armed hostile force." "There's no mistake?" I finally managed. "No mistake," Mr. Collins answered. "The President was briefed personally. Due to the classified nature of the mission, recognition was delayed. That delay ends now." I sat there, stunned, as General Harris leaned forward. "You'll want to start preparing. Ceremony's next Thursday. East Room. Full media coverage." I nodded automatically, throat too tight to speak. It wasn't until later that night, alone in my quarters, that I pulled out the battered notebook I'd kept through both deployments. Flipping to the back page, I found the line I'd written after the valley. Whatever happens, your worth isn't measured by their understanding. I closed the notebook slowly, and still, the decision I'd been dreading hovered like a storm cloud. Should I invite them? For 3 days, I wrestled with it. Every draft of a message felt too emotional or too cold, or worse, like I was begging for attention. On the 4th day, I typed exactly 12 words. Ceremony at the White House, Thursday, 2 p.m. Your choice. No greeting, no explanation, no signature. I hit send and powered off my phone. The morning of the ceremony arrived with clear skies and an uncomfortable humidity that pressed against my skin the moment I stepped out of the SUV. Soldiers in full-dress uniforms lined the entrance to the East Room. Camera crews hovered near the press cordon. A string quartet played softly in the distance. Torres caught my eye near the guest seating area and gave me a discreet thumbs up. Major Davis stood nearby, straight-backed in his dress blues, giving me a subtle nod of approval. My family arrived late. I spotted them from a distance, my father checking his watch as they entered, my mother smoothing down her dress with nervous hands, Ethan scrolling through his phone with apparent disinterest. They took seats near the back, looking out of place. Uncomfortable. Good. The ceremony began. One by one, other recipients were called forward. Citations were read. Applause followed. Then came my name. I stepped toward the podium, heels clicking against the polished floor, the weight of my medals jangling softly with each stride. I stood at attention as the military aide began reading the citation. Sergeant Riley Mitchell distinguished herself by exceptionally valorous conduct in the face of the enemy. As the aide detailed the firefight, the helicopter crash, the triage under fire, the airstrike coordinates I'd called in, I dared one glance at the audience. My father's face was pale. My mother's hand trembled at her mouth. Ethan just stared. And finally, the aide concluded. Her actions directly resulted in the saving of 15 U.S. service members and the prevention of further planned attacks on U.S. soil. The room fell silent. The president stood from his chair, walked toward me, and placed the medal around my neck. The Distinguished Service Cross, silver, heavy, gleaming like it belonged to someone else. Then he broke protocol. He leaned toward the microphone, voice steady and deliberate. Sergeant Mitchell, he said, meeting my gaze with unwavering seriousness. You saved more lives than anyone will ever know. The audience rose as one. Applause thundered through the East Room. I stood there, chin high, heart steady, watching my family remain frozen in their seats, unable to process what they were seeing. As the ceremony concluded and the press surged forward for photos and sound bites, I felt someone tug gently at my sleeve. A young reporter, eyes bright with curiosity. Can we get a statement from your family? She asked, motioning toward them. I turned, watching as my father fumbled with his jacket buttons, my mother avoiding eye contact, Ethan looking like he wanted to sink through the floor. I said nothing. But for the first time, I smiled. Funny. After years of ignoring me, they suddenly couldn't stop looking at me. The East Room had mostly emptied, the applause long since faded, but my family lingered near the wall like nervous spectators who'd missed half the play and were now pretending they understood the plot. My father stood stiffly by the tall French doors, adjusting his cufflinks with trembling fingers. My mother kept fidgeting with the strap of her handbag, her gaze darting around as if she was searching for a socially acceptable exit. Ethan, for once, wasn't scrolling his phone. He was staring at me, at the medal on my chest, at the people lining up to shake my hand. Funny how a few words from the president could rearrange a lifetime of dismissals. I stayed near the refreshments table, chatting with General Harris and Major Davis, accepting congratulations from strangers. Commanders I'd never met, officials I never thought would know my name. From the corner of my eye, I saw them start moving toward me. Slow, hesitant, like approaching a wounded animal. I took a sip of water, bracing myself. Riley, my father started, stopping just short of me. His voice, usually full of authority and certainty, sounded off. We didn't know. Didn't know? The words hovered between us like stale smoke. My mother stepped forward next, her eyes glossy, but her hands clenched tight at her sides. We're proud, she said, stumbling over the word like it physically hurt to say. I think. I didn't flinch, didn't smile, just let the silence stretch. You never asked, I said finally, my voice calm, measured. The kind of tone I used with new recruits who thought showing up late to trauma drills was acceptable. You never cared. Not when I joined. Not when I deployed. Not when I bled. Ethan opened his mouth, but I cut him off with just a glance. And now, I continued, setting my glass down with deliberate precision, you're only reacting because it was televised. Because now, it's inconvenient to ignore me. The three of them stood frozen. Around us, senior officers and political aides continued their conversations, oblivious to the private implosion happening in the center of the room. I thought about the countless nights I'd sat alone in my barracks room, waiting for a letter that never came. The holidays spent on deployment with nothing but generic care packages from strangers. The time I cried into my pillow after another dinner at this very house, when my mother waved away my military stories as some childish phase. All of it, crashing into this moment. And still, I didn't raise my voice, because they weren't worth it. Before any of them could sputter out another apology or excuse, I felt a familiar hand on my shoulder. Torres. Let's go, she said, squeezing my arm like an anchor point in a storm. Your real family's waiting. I didn't hesitate. Without another word, I turned away, leaving them there, standing awkwardly in the middle of a room full of generals and cabinet officials. Their stunned faces burned into my peripheral vision as I walked out with my head high. By the time we reached O'Malley's, the unofficial watering hole for half the military personnel in D.C., my teammates were already there, raising glasses, making space at the center booth like they'd saved it just for me. Someone handed me a cold beer. Someone else started retelling the firefight story with all the embellishments only soldiers allow themselves after survival. I laughed, genuinely laughed, for the first time in weeks. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. One new message from Office of the President. Sometimes people need a national spotlight to finally see what's been in front of them all along. Proud of you, Sergeant. I smiled. And this time, it reached my eyes. The applause ended. The cameras left. But my mission just started. The San Antonio heat pressed down on the parade ground like a living thing, thick and relentless even in October. Sweat clung to the back of my neck beneath my patrol cap, but I barely noticed. Standing at the front of the open-air training field, I surveyed the line of fresh recruits in front of me. Dozens of wide-eyed men and women in crisp PT uniforms, their faces a mix of nerves and determination. Combat medicine isn't about heroics, I said, pacing in front of them, my boots crunching against the gravel. It's about doing your job when everything around you is going to hell. It's about keeping your hands steady while your heart's racing. It's about looking at a guy with half his blood on the ground and thinking, I can fix this. Somewhere in the back row, a private shifted nervously. I caught it instantly. You, name? Private Callahan, ma'am. You nervous, Callahan? Yes, ma'am. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. But doubt? I let the word hang. Doubt gets people killed. They stood straighter after that. As the morning wore on, we ran drills on trauma assessments and emergency tourniquet application. I walked between the rows, correcting elbow angles, tightening straps, reminding them again and again. Speed is life. Hesitation is death. By noon, we wrapped. As the recruits headed toward the mess hall, I grabbed my water bottle and started back toward the barracks. That's when I spotted the package sitting on my desk. No return address. But I recognized the handwriting on the label immediately. My mother's. I hesitated before opening it, my pulse quickening despite myself. Inside, carefully wrapped in tissue paper, lay an old, tarnished medal, my grandfather's bronze star from World War II. Alongside it, a folded piece of stationery. I unfolded it with deliberate slowness. Riley, for years I failed to see who you really are. I let fear and pride cloud what should have been simple, loving and supporting my daughter. Your grandfather would have wanted you to have this. I should have given it to you long ago. I'm sorry. Love, Mom. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the medal in my palm. Its weight felt familiar, like closure I hadn't known I still needed. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. I started volunteering at the Veterans Legal Clinic. Thought you should know. No emoji, no apology. But the subtext was there. I smiled, shaking my head. As I tucked the medal into my desk drawer, my phone rang again. This time, Torres. San Antonio, treating you okay? She asked as soon as I picked up. Can't complain, I said, glancing out the window toward the training grounds. New batch of medics, scared out of their minds, but eager. That's how we like 'em. We traded small talk for a few more minutes before she signed off with her usual, "Stay dangerous, Mitchell." I laughed, setting the phone aside. That afternoon, during a classroom lecture on battlefield triage, one of the younger recruits raised her hand. Sergeant Mitchell, she asked, voice tentative, what made you choose this path? I paused. The room went still. For a second, images flickered through my mind. My father's dismissive sighs, my mother's sideways glances, Ethan's laughter at the dinner table, the president's words echoing through the East Room, the thunder of rotors, the sting of shrapnel, the weight of lives held, then saved in my hands. I chuckled softly. Let's just say, I began, letting the words roll off my tongue like a quiet victory. I had something to prove. And I did. The class laughed, light and easy. As they bent over their notebooks again, I turned toward the whiteboard where someone, probably Torres during a previous training rotation, had scrawled in big block letters, "Mission, save lives, always." I capped my marker, stood back, and smiled. Validation? I didn't need theirs anymore. I'd already saved myself. For years, Riley had fought battles both visible and unseen, on foreign soil and inside the walls of her own home. Now, with the nation's second highest military honor resting over her heart, the echoes of every past dismissal had finally been silenced by truth too loud to ignore. Because justice doesn't always arrive with sirens or courtroom verdicts. Sometimes it comes wrapped in a folded flag, sealed with sacrifice, and spoken aloud by voices that once stayed silent. Like the final blast of a long-muted trumpet, her worth rang clear, undeniable, irreversible.